Welcome to the Decision Lab podcast, the sanctuary for wellness professionals like therapists, coaches, creators, and more who are looking to over-deliver to their clients.
We uncover the truth behind cutting-edge wellness products by going straight to the founder.
We use our backgrounds in neuroscience, chemical engineering, and marketing to ask the hard questions in order to eliminate bias, misinformation, and fancy marketing language.
Allowing you to make better wellness decisions and recommendations for yourself and your clients.
So if you're a leader in the health and wellness space, welcome. This podcast was designed for you.
Join us every week for interviews that will change how you think about wellness.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Decision Lab podcast. And today's a special day because we have the whole CBA team with us. And we're also interviewing someone that I've looked up to as a Canadian female founder in STEM. Today, we're talking to Ariel. And Ariel is a neuroscientist and former psychotherapist who's witnessed firsthand the struggles many face with mental health. And this led her to co-found Muse, a health tech startup aimed at revolutionizing brain health through technology. Muse is used by hundreds of thousands globally and is featured in over 200 scholarly publications. Can't wait to get into all the science later. Ariel started with no formal business training and has been able to secure $18 million in funding from Silicon Valley investors, including A-list celebrities. Ariel and Muse have been featured in thousands of articles with major media outlets from everything like CNN, Forbes, Fortune, Popular Science, the list goes on and on. Ariel is also a former fashion designer. She blends her creativity with science to shape her work and health tech, and she's a huge advocate for increasing female participation in STEM fields. Ariel has a deep passion for understanding the human mind, and she's committed to empowering individuals to enhance their mental capabilities. Through Muse, she provides innovative tools and insights that motivate people to actively engage in their wellness journeys and inspires them to achieve their full potential. Welcome to the Decision Lab podcast, Ariel. We're so grateful and excited to have you here.
Thank you. It is my joy and pleasure to be here. Hello.
So pumped to have you on here. So the first segment that we like to do with our guests is one that we actually don't tell them about because it's a surprise. So let's listen in here for a second on a video that we got from someone close to you.
Ariel, happy birthday from Oxford. Lady birthday. I love you so much. 3 words to describe you. Incredible. Always there. I'm going to count that as 1 word. And the best. I'm so grateful for our long friendship and deep sisterhood and how we can have so much fun, go so deep mentally and emotionally, and then have the most strategic business conversations. I love how supportive you are, and I'm really grateful for our friendship and to be on this journey through life together. Love you lots. Have an amazing day.
Wow.
So tell us,
Hi, Shelly.
tell us a little about who that was. Yeah, tell us about who that was and what she means to you.
That's Shelly Burton. She is an extraordinary healer. She has the capability and sense to really understand from an emotional and a spiritual level what's going on with somebody. She has a beautiful platform called Empathy Heals that she's really crafting as a business to expand the sharing of empathy and its practices with others. But how did you know I know Shelly? How did you get in contact with her? What just happened? That was the best.
We're like ninjas in that way. This segment was actually Miles' idea. He's a genius on like human connection, human behavior. So he's sneaky that way.
That's brilliant. Yeah, you found one of my girls. She's wonderful.
Heck yeah. We love talking to people that love the people that we bring on here just so others can share in that love and compassion too. So that's awesome. So first question I love to ask people is, your intro is wild. There's so many things that you've done and that you are doing currently. If I knew you in middle school, would I have known you'd be here?
No. So in middle school being grade 7, 8, I was, which is really, really early in the day. I was definitely a girl who was strange. I like to wear different things. You would have thought I would be a fashion designer, would be the number 1 guess. I used to love to talk with my hands. I remember somebody said that I would be a ESL sign language teacher because I was so effervescent and communicative in my body language. And I loved theater and drama. So you would not have plugged me as a scientist entrepreneur, but hopefully you would have seen some of my dynamism in multiple fields.
No kidding. Sounds like you've always had that creative streak. I know that's a big piece that in prepping was kind of interesting, the fashion background that you have. So you don't hear that very often. Where did the science come in? Like you mentioned, like neuroscientist, psychotherapist. Some of our audience might not know how you become a neuroscientist or things like that. Like what was your path as far as like getting into science and psychology and psychotherapy?
Sure. So I was a kid who always liked a lot of different things. My mom was an artist, so I was given a lot of permission to create and be an artist and encouraged in that direction, and hence the fashion design and creativity. I was also kind of the odd one out in my family because I really loved science and wanted to figure out how things worked and, was able to also think in that logical way. And when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, it wasn't like girls can be whatever they want. They're like, you have to choose what are you going to be? How can you be an artist and a scientist? And I'd be like, but can't I just do both and do everything? At the same time, both of my parents were entrepreneurs because my mom was an artist. She didn't work for anybody else but herself. And my dad would buy houses and renovate them. And so I was really brought up to believe that you can forge your own path, whatever it is. And so I kind of managed to hold all of these balls. And, in high school, both had a job in a research lab through co-op and was like the designer of the school plays. I was able to manage both of them. And when it came time to go to university, I was either going to go to a school here called Ryerson for fashion design, or I was going to go to a top university for science. I decided I better go to the University for Science at the University of Toronto here, because it's not something that you can like catch up on later in life. You really have to follow the track. So I went to U of T. They didn't actually have a neuroscience department at the time, so I started in psychology and biology. This is now the late 90s. And then I volunteered in research labs. I just kept sort of pushing above and beyond to build my sort of presence and credentials in science. And along the way, because I had this entrepreneurial streak, I really wanted to also bring in the idea of how do you create a business in this domain. And so I started collaborating in a research lab with a guy called Professor Steve Mann. He was the inventor of the wearable computer. He's the guy who made something. Yeah. So I was super lucky to be in Toronto, having gone to a university that had, this level of caliber. And I was ballsy as hell. Very confident for no apparent reason. And so it was just like, I can do that. And I can do that. And sure, even if I couldn't. So, a lot of my younger self was like, okay, fashion. I'm just going to like make some shirts and go around and sell them to people. And I did. And I was a fashion designer. Or it's just like science. Okay, I'm like in third year university and I'm just going to email everybody that I can find at the neuroscience department at the hospital and ask if they want volunteers in their lab. So it was always just like, I'm going to do this thing. And so over time, with a whole bunch of like doing and not being afraid of people saying no to you and like, are you really qualified? It's like, I'm going to get there and I'm going to figure it out. I can do this. I managed over time to morph all of this into a business that really brought all of these streams together, which is bringing together art and neuroscience and business in the creation of Muse.
Wow.
That's awesome.
It's been a lot of fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
Have there been any, I'm sure there are, have there been any really hard points on this journey that maybe kind of inspired you to pursue mental health?
So definitely the mental health side is, key. I was lucky enough to be somebody who had a lot of pluck and didn't suffer from anxiety. And, that can be true for a lot of your life. And then all of a sudden something happens and you're like, oh my God, why am I feeling so anxious? Like, when I got pregnant, all of a sudden the anxiety went through the roof. And it's like, why am I sitting in a car worried that it's going to be in an accident, where I used to be somebody who never wore a seatbelt, which was not a smart idea, but not risk averse. And then after I had my first child, I ended up with postpartum depression, which I didn't realize was actually postpartum OCD. So mental health, it's something that you take for granted until you realize that, wow, the world can look very dark. You can have all sorts of very difficult and traumatic thoughts in your head. And having, also been able to exist without those thoughts for a period of time, you're able to see, oh, well, I can actually shift what goes on in my mind. Some of this is chemical and, needs to be shifted with pharmacology, but also a massive component of this is psychological. And I can learn how to have dominion over my own thoughts and not be sucked in by these feelings of fear and anxiety.
Heck yeah. I love that. I can not resonate with the postpartum depression and being pregnant, but definitely the mental health journey of a founder. Mine was anxiety is in relation, like laying on the floor, like company had just failed. And I'm like, what the hell? Like, why am I having my first panic attack ever? And it's just like that, the way that you said it just appeared out of nowhere. And it's just like, I've never been this way. That resonated so heavily with me.
Yeah, and for some people, anxiety is like, a fish being in water. It's like, I feel anxious all the time. Isn't this how everybody feels? Isn't this?
Chloe.
I think I was born anxious. Like I probably came out of the world and was like, so I'm the opposite. And then I have moments in my life where I'm like, is this what everyone else feels like on a normal day-to-day basis?
Yeah, and so both of them are perfectly valid experiences, and both of them are really hard to understand unless you've been in the other's shoes. And as we are able to taste what the other side feels like, whether it be anxiety, depression, or calm stability, we're able to realize that, like, hey, our brains and bodies don't just have to exist in this way. We can exist in a spectrum, and we can do things that start to shift ourselves to the other side of the spectrum. And we can overcome our internal physiological and psychological tendencies and habits and start to retrain them. And it's a long, annoying, and painful process, but it's doable.
Long, annoying, and painful process. I love that. Something else that's interesting to me as we're doing some research is you got this fashion background. And I don't know if you know, everybody knows Steve Jobs, and he talks about matching liberal arts with technology and stuff. But Estee Lauder, I don't know if you know who that is, but she's like the most badass female entrepreneur ever. And she just has this, like, she would literally just be in elevators like, hey, you want me to do this? Like, I'll do like the creams and all that kind of stuff. And you seem to become like a combination of both of them. It feels like to me, I just have this, I'll figure it out. You need people in your research institution, like, let me come do that. Like, so I really love that. And so I'm just curious how the fashion side of what you've done and like the technology and the science side, how you've blended those things, how they've affected what you've developed at Muse.
Amazing. So when we first started building Muse, and maybe I should explain what that is because people may not be knowing what I'm talking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I have one. This is Muse. It is a clinical grade EEG, meaning it actually reads your brain, in a slim consumer form factor. So this kind of thing might feel familiar to people right now. It's like, oh yeah, I've seen things like that. You slip it on and it reads your brain. And well, when we started creating this, so I started in the lab in the year 2001, 2002. This was before there were any wearables. This was before there was an iPhone for wearables to connect to. And so by like 2010, when we started to actually make it into a product, like this, the very first wrist-worn wearables had started to come out. And we could say like, yeah, this is like a Fitbit. Actually, at that point, we talked about Nike Fuel Bands and Jawbone Ups because those were the popular ones at the time.
Had a jawbone. Let's go.
Yeah, like 2010, 2011. This is like, the beginning of the wearable revolution. We're like, it's like a Nike Fuel Band for your brain because nobody even knew what a Fitbit on your wrist was. So Fitbit was still just a little bit that went on your pants. And so it really became my fashion background, understanding how you make things wearable, compelling, emotionally attractive, plus my neuroscience background, understanding how the brain works, plus the entrepreneurial side, like, hey, we can do this, even though it's totally crazy, we can totally do this. Plus the right team. So when I was working in the lab with Dr. Steve Mann, he had this amazing graduate student named Chris Amony, and Chris was an extraordinary technologist. It's like literally Chris and Steve were building Google Glass in like 2001, but it was 2000. Google Glass didn't come out until 2012. This was like literally the precursor technology. So I was working with Steve. So Chris Amony was in Steve Mann's lab, and Chris and I got together along with Trevor Coleman, who was my boyfriend at the time's best friend. Trevor Coleman, Chris Amony, and I got together and started creating Muse. And because Chris was an absolute technical genius, he was able to do the electrical engineering and lead his team. I was able to bring in the design and neuroscience, and Trevor was able to really pull together the kind of startup business documentation side of it. We would always joke that I was the gas pedal, like, yeah, we can do this. Chris was the engine, they could make the technology. And Trevor was the brake, like, do we have a contract for this?
I love it. You got to have the squad when you start.
Yeah, and so that was incredibly early in the day. So that was started kind of making this into a real thing 2007, 8, started making it into a real device 2010. By 2014, we launched in Best Buy, and we launched a brain sensing headband that could help you meditate right in Best Buy. So this was 10 years ago, with an early version of this device, which was actually quite similar, but a bit clunkier. And so over the years, we've developed the technology further, deployed it widely, had it used very widely by researchers as well as by consumers. First as a meditation tool to give you real-time feedback on your brain while you meditate. And then as a sleep tool to give you really precise data about your sleep and sleep interventions. And now actually as an overall brain health tool, helping you understand and optimize your brain health.
Heck yeah. And how did the design, like creating products like this, how did your background in fashion, like in putting something on someone's head and all that kind of stuff, I'd love to just understand like what went into the actual, like what it looks like versus the functionality and like how you made some of those calls.
Sure. So, in clothing design, you can have a lot of flexibility around what you're creating. Yes, it has to fit on the body. Yes, the person has to like it, but you've got a lot of latitude. That's part of what makes it so creative. Technology, not so much so. Here, form and function needed to be so tightly merged. And it was a lot of Chris's engineering genius that figured out how to make a form factor that literally anybody could put this little device on their head, go like this, tighten it up, and in 3 minutes get high quality EEG data. In the past, you'd have to go into a lab to do that. You'd need to use gel. And so he designed a dry sensor system. And so he and I, along with another industrial designer, we would bring in people, make prototypes, and really try to understand how people used the tool. So at this point, it wasn't so much about the aesthetics of fashion, but really about the essence of design. How do you make a tool that's going to fit in on somebody's head, that's going to fit robustly across a range of different head types? I would go to parties with tape measures and just be measuring head after head to figure out what the ranges are.
Estee Lauder, you are like Estee Lauder. Like, I'm telling you, that is amazing.
And then, of course, aesthetics is kind of at the end, where you make something that's going to be slim enough and small enough and the right color that it fits in, symmetrical. We used to have a one-sided design, but people felt like it was too futuristic. I would actually go out into the street. So the first Muses, I would put on my head the various prototypes and I'd walk down the street and see how many people looked at me. Like it was, what were the reactions? Like, did this just seem like it fit into somebody's normal wear, which this did? We had like single-sided ones and people would be like, that's weird. And there's a glasses shop down the street. So I'd walk in to get her reactions, the woman that worked there. And I'd be like, what do you think of this? She's like, I don't know, honey, it looks cute. Sold.
Sold.
That's amazing.
Talk about things that don't scale. That's awesome.
So, all of this, kind of, this is all fun, but, underneath this was an incredible amount of technological capability to actually make a device work to get very, very sensitive, high quality signal and do it reliably. So reliably that researchers now use the Muse in their labs instead of a big clunky research grade system.
I'm curious, what made you choose meditation? Have you been a meditator, or was it something you were seeing in the lab that was working really well for people?
So a few things. One, we knew that meditation was really good for you. So as a neuroscientist, I had, at the time when we were really honing in on meditation, at that point, there were about 800 studies demonstrating the benefits of meditation. At this time, there's orders of magnitude more than that. But, 800 studies demonstrating that meditation really positively affects the brain. And this was the beginning of the kind of meditation revolution, like 2012, 2013. Meditation was becoming a thing that people were aware of, that actresses and CEOs were doing. And we knew that it was fundamentally good for you. And I'm somebody who had tried to meditate much of my life. I found it fascinating and I really sucked at it. In case it wasn't obvious, I was always trying to do multiple things at the same time, a brain that went in many directions, and sitting still was just not really part of my personality. And so I was somebody who knew that meditation was good for me, knew all the benefits of it, and just couldn't do it. And so as we were kind of honing in on what Muse was going to be good for, we recognized that one of the great values that it could have is by giving you real-time feedback on your brain when you meditated to let you know if you were doing it right. So, most of us, when we go to meditate, we like to sit down and our brain bounces all over the place. And then you're like, oh my God, I'm not good at this. What am I supposed to be doing? This sucks. And so we tried to create a tool that would solve that would actually give you real-time feedback on your brain, actually be like a little coach or guru telling you what was supposed to be going on and guiding you and reinforcing you for doing it right. And that was initially how Muse was born.
Dang, that's awesome. I remember when Muse first came out, because I've always been a techie, like MKBHD, unbox therapy, And I remember when they reviewed Muse first time, I was like, this is the coolest thing that I've ever seen in my entire life. My background is cognitive behavioral neuroscience as well. So I love neuroscience. And I'm just sitting here thinking like fMRIs and functional EEGs and all these crazy things that you have to do. And now like a little device that you can just strap on over your head, you can just, I was like mind blown. Like it was just so cool to be able to do these types of things. Then the application into meditation, it's cool.
Thank you. Yeah. So we were very lucky. It was the right thing at the right time. We knew there at that point, you know, there were enough people, it was still very, very early on, but there were enough people who were like, I really need to learn this meditation thing. And then they'd start to use Muse and then they'd figure out how to meditate. And so we started to see our first few Amazon reviews being, I remember the first reviews so clearly. One of them was, my husband is going through cancer therapy and I used Muse and it has made me a nicer person and better to my kids. And I just read that and it was like, what? Like what we made actually worked? And then we started to get more and more reviews like that coming in and people being like, I've tried to meditate for years and like, finally I can meditate. And then we started to get like police officers who were like, and I use this at the end of my shift and it's helping me self-regulate. And then the Mayo Clinic started to bring it on and started to use it for studies. They're for studying breast cancer patients using Muse. It's like, oh my God, like breast cancer patients are using our tool to see if it'll help the process of the cancer care surgery and process. And it actually did. It decreased their stress and decreased their fatigue and improved their quality of life. So it's been this incredible kind of overwhelming journey of watching this thing that we created that we genuinely hoped would have an impact actually work.
That's awesome. So meditation is awesome, but you're in like mental health space and you're a mom. Like if you're thinking about like your kids or children, like are there any other mental health tools or practices or things like that you suggest to them or would suggest to them?
Sure. So being a mom, meditation becomes very key, both for yourself and for your kids. And I have a 2.5-year-old and an 8-year-old. You're certainly not going to get a 3-year-old to meditate, but modeling meditation for them really helps. You know, they can sit there and see what you're doing. You know, mommy's meditating now, so make it clear. And then with kids, the first step in is sometimes the breath, just like, hey, 5 deep breaths. And the best way to get them started is to make them do it before something else they want. Mommy, I want my tablet. Okay, first 5 deep breaths. And then you get your tablet. Not that the tablet's a reward, but sometimes you just need to do it. And so you might as well stack a healthy behavior behind it and make that be reinforcing. So as they age, then it starts to become more about emotional self-awareness. So meditation as an adult is really important because it allows you to observe your feelings and not necessarily act on them. And so to me, one of the most important things that you can teach as a mom to your children about meditation is, one, that you can take a break and disconnect from the thing that's feeling very intense to you and just use it to, use your breath to calm down your body, take a break and calm down your body. 2, it's understanding that we can feel really emotionally intense sometimes and that feeling of emotional intensity doesn't necessarily need to drive us and we don't need to be stuck there. That you can actually shift from that feeling state that feels so all-encompassing and overwhelming. You have the power and the tools to shift from that state. So, when kid is entering into a tantrum zone, when kid, desperately wants this thing, making it really obvious and clear, like, hey, I know you feel this way now, and we're going to help you move to a different state. Here's some tools and techniques that you can use. Let me just distract you. And then after the fact, we can go back and analyze the fact that like, hey, you felt really terrible. And then we started talking about squirrels and then you felt okay. That's interesting, isn't it? Hey, you shifted that state. Or like, hey, you felt so overwhelmingly like you needed to watch your tablet now and the world was going to come to an end and anything I told you wouldn't have been good enough because you just needed to watch your tablet. And then I threw a ball at you and said catch, and then you giggled, and then we threw a ball back and forth, and it's like, hold on, see? That state could change. You didn't need to be in that state. You can actually make a choice to move out of that state to somewhere else. And I know it feels so hard in that moment, but let's remember this whole thing that happened because it's amazing. Let's celebrate this. You just realize that you can change from that state of deep intensity and desire where it feels like this is the only possibility to a state where you open up other possibilities, where something else is possible. You can change your mood. Oh my God.
That's amazing. I love that. I work a lot with attachment trauma and like abusive relationships and things like that. And so it's just so amazing to hear someone who has so solidly solidified such great, healthy attachment in kids. And because one of the biggest things that kids who, like, if you think of like adverse childhood experiences, they don't learn that like negative emotional states aren't permanent. They do not learn that. And so it's just inspiring to hear that you're able to do that. You were able to do that with your own kids, and like you're passionate about teaching others about that. It's awesome.
Yeah, and that it is doable. And it's something that, we as parents do. We help to shift our kids' states. And then if you take the beat afterwards, once they're calm again, and reflect back on the situation together, they can begin to see, hey, I had that power. We do screen-free weeks with my son. Whenever I go visit my mom's, it's like no screens. And we build it so that he becomes empowered by not watching a screen. It's like, yes, he's like, yes, I did it today. It's awesome. And so otherwise it could just be miserable complaining, no, I didn't get my screen today. So it's really all about having your kid be able to reflect on the experience, be able to reflect on what happens, and be able to create construct in which they actually had some agency and control. It's like, whoa, it's not just mom took away the towel, but it's like, whoa, I didn't do that today and I was awesome. I made that choice. I could do that. I had that skill. I built that capacity inside myself.
Wow. One thing I want to, hit on there that I think is really important is the whole concept of you can give a man fish or you can teach a man how to fish. And I think there are a lot of people out there trying to create positive change and make people's experience on Earth better. And they're doing so by trying to change the external environment and not by giving someone the power to control their own internal environment, to create their environment from the internal state. So I think that's really important for the audience, the people listening to understand.
It's interesting too, because meditation isn't just changing your perception, it's changing your brain. So I'll give you the layup on all of the very well documented white matter tracks that meditation forms in prefrontal cortex. But could you talk about how the internal state Miles is talking about actually maps to literal brain tissue in your nervous system?
Awesome. So yes, meditation makes real change in your brain in so many ways. So let's start at the top, the prefrontal cortex. Prefrontal cortex, the front of your head, the part that evolved last, the part that kind of makes us human. It allows for advanced planning, decision-making, higher order processing. And it turns out that when you meditate, you're strengthening that part of your brain. So good news, as you meditate, you're able to strengthen your prefrontal cortex. Bad news, prefrontal cortex thins as you age. Kind of happens to everybody. But good news, if you're able to maintain a long-term meditation practice, you can strengthen and keep up the volume of that prefrontal cortex as if you were somebody much younger. So in one study by Dr. Sarah Lazar at Harvard, she demonstrated that a long-term meditator at the age of 50 had a prefrontal cortex thickness of a 23-year-old. So why is this important? Decision-making, planning, being able to shut down the lower processes in your brain that might be driving your urges. So we have this little area inside of our head the size of an almond, just kind of behind your ear, and it is called the amygdala. We actually have two of them, amygdalae, and these are the fight or flight systems. It's the thing that's always giving you the feeling of anxiety and danger, and going off about things that are real or imagined. It really doesn't matter which, it's just going to freak out. So the amygdala fires signals that then send the sense of anxiety through your body, increase your blood pressure, and then it also triggers thoughts about the thing that it is afraid of. So you show it fire on television, it will start to go, oh my God, fire, give you feelings of fire, and then thoughts about fire. Oh, where was that fire? Is it near? Was my dad there? No, all of the thoughts to keep you safe when they're in really danger. So what meditation has been demonstrated to do is to downregulate the activity of the amygdala. So short-term meditators and an fMRI have been shown to have decreased activity of the amygdala. Long-term meditators have even been shown to have decreased size of the amygdala. And people who meditate have been shown to have an increased connection between their prefrontal cortex and their amygdala. So their prefrontal cortex is actually able to better regulate the amygdala. So it's kind of like the prefrontal cortex is the parent who's like, I can see what's going on. And the little amygdala is like the child freaking out, like, oh, it's a monster, it's a monster. And the parent comes in, no, honey, it's just the shadow on the wall. Let me turn on the light. It's all okay. So in meditation, what you're doing is you're down-regulating the amygdala. You're strengthening the prefrontal cortex. You're bringing in your logical, better ability to think. You're having metacognition, the ability to rise above a scenario and see what's going on from multiple directions, and to actually control your physiology and to down-regulate your anxious, scared mind and body.
So
I love that.
just to make sure that I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, it's almost like the amygdala was something that we needed as cavemen to make sure that we didn't die. And the prefrontal cortex is the evolved version of who we are now. When we walk outside, we're probably not going to die anymore because we're in a civilized society. And so it's communicating with that little part that was there to save us hundreds of years ago to help us make better decisions for now compared to the decisions that it needed to make a long time ago.
I think that's a reasonable 100-foot assessment. Obviously there's still things in our life that are scary and need to be managed, but they're often managed far more effectively with our cognitive functions rather than with the fear drives. And, these fear drives, yes, in the past, they could have been about snakes and tigers. Now fires really are real. They really do happen. But our amygdalas also get really hung up about likes on Facebook and about wrinkles in our pants or on our faces, and all of these other things that it can create very anxiety-provoking stories about that don't actually serve us and really don't serve to keep us safe. So amygdala, still useful. Hyperactive amygdala, totally a drag, man. Not useful.
Totally a drag. Yeah, it for sure is. So help me understand, and again, I'm putting on my skeptical buyer hat here a little bit. How does measuring brain waves with the device help with meditation, or what's the point of measuring brain waves? I can meditate without this. What's the benefit?
Sure. So there's an awesome principle that says that if you can measure it, you can change it. Or if you can measure it, you can improve it. Sort of the basis of quantified self-biohacking. With Muse, what we're actually able to do is track the brain activity associated with focused attention versus the brain activity associated with mind wandering. So when you sit down to meditate, you have your basic meditation practice, you focus your attention on your breath, take deep breaths, you're super focused into it. Eventually your mind is going to wander away onto Facebook, your itchy foot, whatever it is. The air conditioning being too cold. It's then your job as a meditator to notice that your mind has wandered and then to say, hey, mind, you're supposed to be meditating. Come on back. And that action of noticing that your mind has wandered and then bringing it back, that's kind of like the bench press rep at the gym for your meditation. That's what's really strengthening your prefrontal cortex's ability to observe, to inhibit your action, to switch activities, and to bring it back in. So in a standard meditation, you're either a novice and your brain is wandering all over the place and you're like, what the F am I supposed to be doing? In which case, having a device that tells you when your mind is wandering or when you're focused and guides you back into that focus state and reinforces you for being there is super helpful. When you're an expert meditator or somebody who meditates regularly, it's still incredibly helpful because you, as a meditator, your mind wanders. And often you don't notice it till 1, 3, 4 minutes later, and you're thinking about this thing, you're like, right, back to my meditation, right, back to my meditation. So it's kind of like in a traditional meditation, if you can get in returning 5 times in a 5-minute meditation using Muse, you might be returning 50 times, like getting in, 10 times the bench press rep at the gym. And it's also kind of like the principle of looking into a mirror. So, I didn't look in the mirror today. I left the house. I look totally fine, right? And then you look in the mirror and you're like, oh, if I didn't realize that the hair was sticking out over there, okay. Not that we should be focused on our looks, but I'm giving an example that people can resonate with. Mm-hmm. You look in the mirror and then you say, I haven't really been doing that in a way that's the most effective. So this kind of gives you a mirror into your mind. It gives you another way to observe a process. And by doing so, to be able to shift and change, and I'm going to use the word correct because in some way people are like, but there's no correct way to meditate. There are tools and techniques, and there are correct ways to do the techniques and incorrect. There's many different kinds of techniques. Mm-hmm. But it's like being in yoga class, doing the right form really gets you there faster.
Cody and I always reference this saying of you can't read the label from inside the bottle, meaning that if I was like a pickle sitting in a pickle jar, I would have no idea if I was a dill pickle, what kind of pickle I was, right? And it sounds like what you're saying is this gives people the ability to reflect because what creates the problem often won't solve the problem. So if your brain's creating it, it won't be aware of what needs to change. And you're essentially giving them that feedback system could change.
Better said than I did. Beautiful. Gets
nice,
you out of
Miles.
pickle. Being inside your own jar.
That's cool. So brainwaves, I know them, I've measured them, I know they're real, but I have the number of people that come to me. It's like, you use this thing to measure your brain waves. Isn't that like Kumbaya in the forest, weird, like energy Reiki stuff? Like, could you talk to us about brain waves, what they are, how they're generated, what they mean, like what we know about them, and some of those types of things?
Sure. So brainwaves are the sum total of the neuronal firing inside your head. So inside our head, we have a whole bunch of neurons. They need to communicate with each other, and they do so electrochemically. So they have chemicals moving along a gradient down the axon, and in doing so, they're also moving electricity. Don't worry about how it works, but just know that there is electrical energy that is emitted from each and every one of these little neuronal connections, these little neuronal communications. The sum total of this electrical activity can actually be read on the surface of your head. So it's kind of like every neuron is playing its own little funny instrument and making a whoo, oh, whoo. And then on the outside of your head, you can hear the sum total of everybody singing together. And that is the frequency. Just like audio is a frequency, this is an electrical frequency. So it turns out that if you put an incredibly sensitive penny to your forehead, an electrical amplifier, in the same way that we can read our heart rate with an EKG, because it's a big electrical signal, you can read your brain waves. And you can then take that brainwave activity and begin to parse it into different states. So for example, when you are sleeping, your brain works in a beautiful synchronized concert of deep delta waves when you're in deep sleep. So those very slow synchronized waves. When you are awake, but kind of like mind-wandering dream state, you're in theta waves, which are a little bit faster. When you are single-pointed focused attention, very engaged in one thing, internal sensory processing, you see an increase in your alpha wave state. When you are thinking, reading, cognitively processing in a busy way, you're seeing more beta wave activity. If you have a ton of busy cognitive processing, you see more high beta activity. So these are the kind of standard different brainwave states that arise from the state of the mind and how the mind is processing at that moment in time, how harmonious or synchronous it is. And different parts of your brain have different brainwave frequencies going simultaneously. So what we end up reading is, the sum total at the back of your head, for example. When you close your eyes, there's a big signal called the alpha block that you really read easily from the back of your head. When you're focusing and working really hard, there's a signal in front of your head, frontal midline theta. So it's a complex network of signals that you're ultimately able to parse to see these broad states of mind.
And just to further validate this, I used to do all sorts of cool research things for undergrads or whatever, and there's something called a spiker box, and you can get these giant African cockroaches, and they're huge and they're scary, but they have one central nerve that you can stick two little spikes in, and then you can literally listen to the sound of neurons firing, because there is a sound that is produced by the electrochemical gradient that she's describing. The sound of those electrons and the sound of that electricity has a sound. And then the other thing is you can play music into that nerve, and the cockroach will dance to the music because it's sending frequencies into the nerve. And so very well documented and established in neuroscience, just to give another example of electricity.
I remember that experiment from first year bio. Yep.
Yes.
Cockroach.
So fun. So scary, but so fun.
Yeah, you say it and I hear the sound now, of the
Gives me
neuron.
goosebumps thinking about cockroaches, but it's wild. So who's your guys' ideal buyer? Who do you ideally want to buy this, and what's your dream outcome for them as one of the founders of this?
Sure. So we started as a meditation device, and then as a meditation device, we were seeing women with anxiety who were a huge market, women who just wanted to meditate more, you should meditate, but get back on the wagon. So, tons of women kind of 25 to 45. Now that I'm more in the 45, I'm 45. I'm starting to notice a lot more people, menopause and perimenopausal, using it to manage anxiety and also sleep. We also have a large community of kind of performance-driven men, CEOs, biohackers that love using Muse as well. Cody's smiling. He probably fits in that domain. There you go.
It helps so much. I get so distracted when you were describing how it helps, you bring your brain back faster. Literally, it's like you were speaking to me directly. So, sorry, I digress.
Yep, it really works. It really makes you more focused and aware of your brain and able to hone in on what you're doing. And then as we had as we started to talk to people to understand how they were using it, one of the big use cases was actually to help people fall asleep. And so that's when we built Muse S, which is the version that Cody's been showing. And that gives you real-time feedback on your brain while you're falling asleep to help you fall asleep faster. Because people were using our meditation interventions to fall asleep. We're like, hold on, we're scientists and technologists and innovators. We can do even better than that. And so we created this amazing experience that we call the digital sleeping pill that actually is created from your mind and body. And as you're falling asleep, it's adjusting the audio in a way that cues your brain into sleep. And then if you wake up again in the middle of the night and you're still wearing the Muse knows that you've become awake, and it brings back in the same experience to help you fall asleep again. And it is super effective. And so we've now, who should be using Muse? Anyone who has difficulty sleeping also.
Wow. I'm getting sleepy just thinking about it. I'm not gonna lie.
Conditioning.
It is. It truly is. That's awesome.
And then from there, we've really expanded out into this larger concept of brain health. So we have this tool that is directly measuring your brain. We've done some amazing studies looking at brain age, for example, and we've been able to identify a marker that is commonly used in the literature for brain performance, and that's called the alpha peak frequency. And so we now have alpha peak frequency in the app. So every time you do a session with Muse, you can also start to track your alpha peak. And it is now widely used in neuroscience and cognitive research, really as a brain health tool.
Wow. So obviously, as a user myself, I feel some of these benefits and things. But what are some of like the results that customers have shared, or like, and specifically, what are ones that like they could like hold you accountable to? Like, if I get a Muse, like I'm pretty positive that I'm going to be able to get these types of results and things like that.
So if you get a Muse, you are going to either figure out how to meditate, for sure, if you don't already know, stick to your meditation practice if you aren't already doing so, and improve and deepen your practice if you already have some. From there, you're going to feel the sensation that your mind is just quieter. It's like something we typically hear in the first 3 weeks. It's like, hey, it's finally kind of quiet in there. That's fascinating. You might notice that you're less reactive. You will notice that you're better able to notice when your mind is wandering and bring it back to what you're working on and stay focused. If you're using the sleep intervention, you will be able to see how well you sleep. So Muse is actually now literally used in place of a sleep lab in dozens and dozens and dozens of studies. It truly is a sleep lab in your own bed. And so you'll be able to see how you sleep, even the depth of your deep sleep. And if you use the digital sleeping pill, you will get assistance falling asleep and falling back asleep. So those are some things that I repeatedly hear and feel very confident sharing as outcomes from the use of Muse.
It's incredible. I'm really curious, like, what was the process in bringing this to market? Like, what kind of research did you have to do to make it commercially available?
It's a huge question. I mean, it's been bringing it to market was long, and there's a lot of validation that's required. There's a collaborator of ours, Dr. Olav Krikolsen. He's a professor at UVic, University of Victoria, and he really did the first paper validating Muse as a clinical grade EEG, and that it is the same as your standard EEG systems. From then, he's gone on to do amazing papers with Muse, using it with baseball players, like real world neuroscience, using with baseball players to be able to identify the brain signal before the perfect pitch, just to look at their cognitive reserves. He used it on the Mars NASA simulator to look at performance of would-be astronauts in the scenario. So, just from him, there's this whole line of research that developed. And then, so we had to validate it both on the EEG side and then on the meditation side. So we had to have a number of studies. Probably the first big one came out was from Davide Crivelli in Milan, and Professor Balconi demonstrating that Muse's meditation actually works, and that when you use it to meditate, you will end up seeing improvements in your cognitive function. They had improvements in Stroop task in theirs. There's another study from Baycrest Hospital demonstrating that yes, Muse actually works to decrease your stress. And then they started to apply it to particular conditions. So Mayo has now run 7, 8, 9 studies with Muse, using it so they've recently used it for long COVID, fibromyalgia, more cancer studies, even with their own doctors. So Mayo did a very large study, about 40 to 50 doctors and healthcare professionals using Muse in the emergency room and in their day-to-day practice. And using Muse, they are able to decrease their burnout by 54% and improve their cognition, their sleep, and their resilience.
Wow. And these things were connected to Muse usage specifically, like
Yeah.
in relation to like all of the parameters you're thinking, like double blind, placebo, all that kind of stuff.
So the Mayo healthcare study wasn't double blind because some people were given Muses and some people weren't. It's really hard to blind that. The initial study that they did with breast cancer patients was randomized control compared to a meditation CD. So, that the study is designed by Mayo. We don't have an input in it, but like they're pretty darn good at designing studies that we have nothing to do with and prove amazing outcomes.
That is what you just described as the most important piece. We've had people on here before that they're like, yeah, we have independent research. It's like, okay, then why does it say it's funded by you? Help me understand this. So that it's independent from you, and that NASA, Mayo Clinic, some of these huge, like crazy companies and research institutions use your products and services as a huge like key in the brain of someone who is like thinking of, how is this valid? Does this make sense? That's just something that I hear. I'm just like, okay, wow, that's wild. Not funded by Muse, and like these other crazy people are using it. Just so anyone listening can kind of understand like how to think about some of this when someone says, yeah, we're used by Mayo Clinic. Like, so I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, and they now buy Muses to run studies about Muse. It's really not fun.
Yeah, no, I get it. That's amazing. I love to hear that. That's legit. What's something like, as you're building Muse, is there anything surprising? All of this research, 200 something research, like as you're building yourself, like, is there anything that was surprising to you or something you learned about the brain that you didn't know previously?
God, I've learned so much about the brain during this journey. It's been a decade of being able to collaborate with amazing scientists on discovering the brain. Probably throughout this journey, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is what I learned about my own brain. I had a concussion along the way after the postpartum mental health phenomena, and, the anxiety that came from it. And so I really learned how differently we perceive the world when our brain is in ill health, and how much of our body becomes dysregulated, like your sleep, your mood. So I got a concussion, like my stomach went crazy. It was very unpleasant because all of these things are governed by your brain. And we don't necessarily think that these physiological symptoms are connected to our brain. But when you actually bring in mind-body practices, when you actually start to work to decrease the anxiety, to get out of the crazy thoughts, to overcome your concussion symptoms by retraining your brain and sleeping well, and, helping you sleep well will then, help all these other systems. When we actually start to work at the level of the brain and the level of the mind, we can really start to improve the rest of our life, both physiologically and functionally, in some pretty awesome ways.
Damn. I love that. Something else that I'm super interested to talk to you about a little bit here is the future. Anyone on Article Squad knows future is where I love to hang out. And I very much believe there will be a neurotechnical layer of our brain that will be the new one, like as we move into like techno-humans, but I digress on that. I'd love to hear your perspective on AI and technology and neurotechnology, biotechnology, nanotech, all these different things, and what that will look like in the future, and some of like your visions and thoughts.
Sure. So really interested is anything that's going to encourage human flourishing and make it easier for us to be more human. So when I think about the impact that AI can make on our lives, there's obviously a whole bunch of negative connotations, but there's also some really positive ones. So, for one, we have an amazing database at Brain Research, and we collaborate on a lot of scientific studies. And so we've been able to create machine learning models of the brain and start to identify biomarkers of the aging brain, biomarkers of depression. All of these things have previously unelucidated signatures in the brain. And to date, the way that you've thought about processing brainwaves is, let's look at the brainwave bands. You do something called a FFT, a fast Fourier transform. You look at the power in each band. But when you can apply AI and machine learning approaches to looking at this data instead, you can start to see patterns and relationships in the brain that were invisible before. So one example is sleep. We were able to create a machine learning classifier so backing up for a second, in the past, if you wanted to have your sleep staged like really properly, you'd go into a sleep lab, they'd take your EEG, and a technician would sit there and hand score your sleep data. And it's expensive and long because that's 8 hours of data. We then took a whole bunch of those readings with Muse that were hand scored, fed it into a machine learning model, and then we're able to create an AI, a machine learning approach that actually could score your sleep and now can do it more effectively than an expert, because experts make mistakes, but we now have, thousands and thousands and thousands of data sets that we can use to really make it precise. And then from there, we're able to look at this very fascinating part of sleep, which is the transition between wakefulness and sleep. And so we know about it as the hypnagogic state. And when you fall asleep, it's kind of like when everything becomes kind of like dreamy and weird. You're not dreaming yet, but everything just becomes sort of weird. And if somebody wakes you up, you're like, no, I wasn't sleeping. And so that hypnagogic state is like the key between wakefulness and sleep. And being able to move from hypnagogia through N1 into N2 is key to actually getting good sleep. So with our cool machine learning models, we've actually been able to look at what's happening in the brain as you move from wakefulness into sleep through hypnagogia and understand with much more detail and much more precision than has ever been seen before, because machines can figure it out better than humans can in this case. Like we can query ourselves, but in terms of actually looking at brain data. And so we've been able to build interventions and use these technological tools to better help people move from wakefulness into sleep, because now we can understand that state, because the data just wasn't available before and the tools weren't available to be able to parse that.
That is so cool. I love hearing about that kind of stuff. So what types of stuff are you guys looking at in the future? Do you have any future innovations? Or I know some of it probably can't talk about some of that stuff, but is there anything like a direction that you're thinking or a path that you see forward into the future, 10, 20, 30 years?
10, 20, 30 years is a very, very, very far future. In the short-term future for us, it's about continuing to build interventions and experiences that help people improve their mental health and to work with collaborators. So, for example, one of the big studies that we have coming up is with the California Precision Measurement Initiative, where Muse will be used with 800 minority youth to be able to both offer an intervention created by Dr. Greg Hayek. So he has a series of beautiful interventions that he created, videos that help you cognitively reframe, like check in on yourself in the moment, and do that paired with Muse to help you sleep and to track sleep. So, we're really interested in building new tools for brain health and empowering people to actually be able to do something about their brain and how it governs the way that you interact with your life.
Do you envision a future where a Muse is on you 24/7?
I don't know. I think it's like, I hope it's optional. It should be optional. For some people, like wearing a Fitbit 24/7 has value because you can see your messages and, wakes you up in the morning and counts your steps. For other people, they don't care for it. That's completely fine. So there will continue to be value built in something like, a neurotech device that you wear 24/7 can nudge you to better behaviors and, inform you of where to turn left as you go down the road but it also going to be optional. Some people choose to engage in such technology and some people go to a point and stop, and that's totally okay. So yeah,
Fair enough.
I can see that future, but not for everyone. Choose your own adventure.
I feel that. Yeah, I get that. So that is a great segue.
Let's also, hold on. I said something that I need to touch back on, because I said choose your own adventure. And I also have to recognize that not everybody has the privilege to have that choice for which adventure they choose. So, unfortunately, we will continue to be schismed along economic lines about, how this technology is available. We try to make ourselves as affordable as we can. It's like, very expensive to make something like this, but also we don't charge more than it costs to make it. So, it's like try to be as accessible as possible to offer as much as we can. And in the future, you will see the trickle down effect, at least, of, if nothing else, the innovations and the insights that come from the use of these neurotechnologies and the places where they can be applied. Those insights will continue to trickle down. So, for example, there's quite a number of studies running with Muse in areas where you wouldn't have been able to bring in neurotechnology before. So I was just on the phone with a researcher from Simon Fraser University this morning, and they're creating a bus that they're going to drive into northern Canada with Muses on it and other equipment to be able to actually bring neurotechnology into places where you couldn't. There's a study a few years ago with Muse, bringing it into small villages in Malawi to track brain activity and screen brain activity in kids there. So, it's always double-sided in terms of who has access, but hopefully tools like this both increase access where it's needed and also continue to have the choice of whether you want to participate or not.
Wow. That's inspiring that you're trying to increase access and get this into the hands of more people. So that's amazing. So as we're going to bring this in for landing, I really appreciate you taking some time here. We have some signature questions that we'd like to ask everybody, just so that everyone at the end kind of knows, hey, go to the end. You can listen to some of these cool things. And the first one is one of my favorites. I ask everybody, but what's a question that you wish you got asked more?
Question I wish I got asked more. What's the best thing you can do with your life?
Oh, holy shit. All right. Ariel, what is the best thing you can do with your life?
Help the people around you, whether you know them or not.
Love it.
Whether you know them or not. I want to make sure everyone heard that.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that. How have you lived that in your life?
So, I try to be kind to the people that I see, try to chat with people that I don't know, reach out and lend a hand to somebody who looks like they need help or not if they look like they don't want you to touch them. And, try to create stuff that other people can use, whether I've met them or not. So I think too often we're like, I'll help you out because you're my friend. And the answer should really be, I'll help you out because you're another person too. It's like you're a real person with thoughts and feelings.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's amazing. That's so inspiring. I love that.
Thank you for that. Okay, question 2. What's a partnership or connection that would really help you outside of them just giving you money?
It's a good question. So one of the ways that Muse is used is in clinics. So naturopaths, chiropractors, mental health clinics, acupuncturists often recommend Muse to their patients. And we've now built a whole suite of tools for clinicians from like the Mayo Clinic uses them down to like single individual practitioners. And so we've built a whole set of tools for practitioners to bring Muse to their clients, and it's really successful. And so if there was a connection that would be helpful, it would be to more practitioners who want to bring these kinds of brain health practices to their patients and clients.
Yeah. And I'm one of them, so I can vouch. I will absolutely talk to some other people. I've got some connections in mind that I think would be super, super useful. Like Amanda Miles from Casey Welco. She has like 50 clinicians underneath her that like something like this could be super interesting for. So, and she runs like a whole collective. So I think that could be an interesting one.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you.
Each podcast, got this from the Diary CEO. Each podcast, we ask the guest, our current guest, to leave a question for the next guest. So we have a question from you from our like most recent podcast, and then you'll get to leave one too. The person, just tiny bit of context on this one because his innovation is really cool, but it's called PIBO, and it stands for Personal Advisory Board. And his belief, Keith Cheney is his name, is that self-made is a myth. Because if you look at the most successful people, they always have people around them that have helped them get where they're at, get them to where they're going. And same thing for everybody in history. And so the question, all that context is, the question is, who would you have on your dream personal advisory board or a PIBO?
Okay, this is really funny. Two things come to mind at first. When you first asked it, without the context, my first thought was my mom, because she really is my personal advisory board. I'm so lucky, she's really, really there for me. Then when we put it in the business context of somebody who can help you, move forward, mentorship, connections, Oprah Winfrey. Or at least what I believe Oprah Winfrey to be, my conception of Oprah Winfrey.
Nice. Okay, Oprah. So you can have more than one person, but you can have like 5 to 7 or so on this. Like Oprah would be one. Are there any other people you'd put on that advisory board?
Now I have visions of Oprah and my mom having dinner together.
Perfect. Putting it out to the
Good thing
universe.
you're a meditator. You can bring the mind back into focus.
Yes.
Like that. Cool. Oprah's a good one. And your mom's always a good one as well. So appreciate that. All right, so it's your turn. What's a question that we could ask the next founder or the next company that maybe you'd be interested to know more about?
That's a great question. What can you do to help more people?
What can you do?
I'm typing it down. What can you do to help?
Because, we all, hopefully, if you're, an ethically aligned founder, you're doing something because you want to help people. So in our case, we want to help them meditate. We want to help them with their mental health. We want to help them with their anxiety, their sleep. And then when you ask the question, how can you help more people? It both has you thinking from the business side, how do I scale? From the accessibility side, how do I make this more accessible? And then from the product side, like what are the expansions that allow me to help more people? And then sometimes it causes you to throw your entire business idea in the garbage because you're not sufficiently doing that. So it's like, hold on. If I was actually doing this to help people, not just make money, like what would I really be doing? How could I actually help more people? Maybe we'll should throw the word actually in there. So, yeah.
Oh, you went through like the framework here. Like if we were to ask you right now, though, how can you actually help more people? What would your response be right now?
Sure. So we could, great question. I hadn't thought of it until you asked me, actually. So how can we actually help more people? So, continue to make our tools as accessible as possible and keep our costs down as much as we can. That becomes a huge barrier to entry. do more things like podcasts where we're communicating to people about stuff you can do in your life to make you better, totally aside from buying a Muse, as well as having, more advocacy for Muse because it is a thing you can do to make you better. Expanding into other languages. So we used to be in French, German, and Spanish, and then it just became too much to manage the languages. We're assigned to like 85 countries. So, then continuing the language expansion. So those are the first few things off the top of my head. And to give away lots of love.
Give away lots of
People, they
love.
love themselves. You're allowed to love yourself. That's how you can help more people. Recognizing that we're all capable of being loved and loving ourselves, even if it doesn't feel like it.
Yes. Something we had Dr. Paul Zak on. He's legendary neuroscientist, and he's called Dr. Love because he studied oxytocin and human connection so much. And he mentions that his thing is Love Plus. That's his purpose, is to spread love to everybody. And he mentioned something he's really good at is telling people that you love them. Like, tell them, like, Chloe, Miles, I love you guys. I love you too. Like, I love everyone, and say it out loud what you appreciate and stuff. So I really love that.
Thanks.
Heck yeah. So anything that you'd like to leave the audience with, or a place you'd like them to go, we'll obviously put links in the description and stuff, but anything you'd like to leave people with, or a place you'd like to direct them?
Sure. So I'd like to leave everybody with the knowledge and recognition that even if it feels like you're not good enough, or you're having a sucky day, or the thoughts in your head are really effing annoying, you can stop, take a breath, shift your focus, shift your activity, and move yourself in a different direction. Might pull you back, but that's okay. Just keep doing it one step after the other and move yourself to a better place. And we are all here rooting for you as you do so.
What an empowering self-agency-led mission to end the pod with. Well, we really appreciate you hopping on, and we're so grateful that you took some time out of your day. We know you didn't have to, so we're really, really grateful that you took some time to be with us.
Oh, it is my joy and my pleasure. And you asked me a place to direct people to. ChooseMuse.com. ChooseMuse.com. And yeah, this was wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Thank
and
you so
if you guys
much.
haven't liked and subscribed on YouTube already, please do that. Until next time, peace.